Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to present the next webinar in our series called Neo Insights, where we provide you information, knowledge based on the experience of many of our consulting partners and often industry experts and clients. And I'm delighted today. The topic for today is focused on digital initiatives. We're noticing significant increase in spend across the industry. And particularly, our focus today is not just on digital initiatives, but really how sourcing, global sourcing, is helping drive digital initiatives that drive revenues. I am delighted that our panelists today, we have Yariv Drori, who is the VP of Strategy at AOI Digital. And more importantly, Yariv brings with him significant experience in growing high-tech companies in the e-commerce and the ed technology space. He's also spearheaded many initiatives that have leveraged globalization, not just from Asia Pacific, but also in Latin America. And so I'm looking forward, Yariv, to your comments and the sharing of your experiences at today's webinar.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Yariv. Thanks for joining us. I'm also delighted to have on the webinar with me one of Neo Group's leading consultants, a partner and senior VP at Neo Group, Kevin English. Kevin not only focuses on assisting CIOs and CTOs and the whole spectrum of strategy, sourcing, governance, organizational management, but he particularly is also focusing on the rising role of Chief Digital Officer and brings with him over 30 years of experience, not just at Neo, but other leading consulting and technology companies. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Atul.
And just as a brief intro for some of you that may not know me, I'm the CEO and founder of Neo Group, and I'm delighted today to moderate this session. So without further ado, let's get started. Before I do that, for some of you that may not know Neo, just a quick, brief introduction. Neo is a management consulting company that was founded in 1999 with a singular focus on helping clients manage the whole services supply chain. So Neo advisors help customers on sourcing strategy, sourcing itself, sourcing management, and the overall governance. Neo also provides governance solutions. So we design, set up, support, manage program management offices, but we also have a subscription service that helps clients monitor risk for their suppliers and locations globally. So let's move on to the session. So Kevin and Yariv, I think both of you have been in this field, so you see a lot of this growth. It's interesting. I purposely picked a source from 2012. This was a prediction by eMarketer in terms of how digital ad spending was growing. And when I looked at the 2014 actual numbers that have been reported, the number was actually in excess of 140 billion. So I think those predictions are true, right? So the market is growing. At the same time, we're noticing that the whole social media space is growing, right? So companies, when they look at Facebook and Twitter and apps, whether it's the Samsung platform or the Android platform or the iOS platform, companies are noticing that it's no longer just the consumer space, but really all these are having an impact on the B2B space also. And interestingly, the other thing we notice is that this is not just about the developed world, right? That this tsunami of this digital El Nino, as others call it, is not just in the developed part of the world like the US, UK, France, Germany, but in fact, as you look at this chart, you're noticing how significant growth is happening in developing markets like Brazil, Philippines, Turkey, and others. So as you look at it, maybe Yariv, maybe start with you. Do you have any initial comments that you like to make in terms of what you have seen in the early stages, which no longer is early stages today, right? What have you seen, particularly as we see companies not just looking at ways to engage customers, but really using digital to launch new products? Yariv, comments?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that is no longer just a rising trend. This is where you have to be in order to be in business. And digital is not just something else that you do. It's what we're seeing that in marketing, but not just in marketing, in e-commerce as well, it's usually digital first. Or I would go take it to the extent and say that latest, in the last couple of years, when marketing campaigns were designed, they were designed for mobile first, and then to digital. We're already at the stage where, desktop digital, quote unquote, is becoming archaic, and all the focus is on mobile. The risk of not being in this game and not keeping up, as difficult as it is to keep up, is severe to the entire business. I mean, if you look at disruptions that happened as a result of the digital uprising, I mean, it affects every industry. If you think what Geico did to insurance, what Expedia did to travel agents, what Netflix done to Blockbuster, and what Amazon is doing to retail as a whole, this is all disruptions that are riding technology and the digital revolution. Those companies did not exist in the form that they are only 10 years ago. So even for large companies, especially if they're not in this game, smaller high-tech companies will be a serious threat to their business.
Right. It's interesting, right? So I think, Yariv, you're reinforcing the point that this is not just about a social media strategy or a consumer-focused website. Yesterday, for example, we know HBO, one of the leading cable channels, yesterday launched HBO Now as a direct subscription service through the Apple TV platform, right? So we're seeing companies actually launch digital products. Kevin, you've worked in this space for a long time, and you've been working not just with CTOs, but this whole new rising chief digital officers. Your observations on companies, as they think about digital strategies, digital products?
So CDO was originally the purview of media and entertainment companies. It was born out of the notion that we had to take our analog content and move it to digital. We have moved way beyond that now. So as this particular graphic points out, whether you're in the telecommunications industry, automotive, financial services, CPG, digital is your lifeblood now, whether it's introducing products and services, whether it's connecting with your clients, whether it's getting information out to your subscribers or customers via mobile devices. There's no way to disconnect digital from your current business environment. And it becomes a combination of multiple business imperatives, whether it's revenue generation, new product launch, customer stickiness, and without a proper digital strategy, a company, quite frankly, just isn't going to prosper in today's environment.
And Kevin, I think, and Yariv, as you see, what we're starting to see is if you're a supplier in the marketplace and you're looking to pitch a client on technology initiatives, what you're finding is you're no longer just pitching the CIO or the CTO, but there's a whole new person that you're also having to pitch in many of these companies, and that that truly is the chief digital officer. And I particularly found it also interesting as we've spent time talking to chief digital officers, how that role really also differs depending on the company. In some of these companies, we noticed that they are very focused on generating new sources of revenue, like the HBO Now example, right? Very, very clearly. And in other cases, they are looking at this role as a whole way of engaging the customer in new different ways, like the CDO role that exists in the city of New York, and now also the state of New York, for that matter. How do we engage, in their case, the citizens in a whole new different way? So I know, Kevin, you've spent a lot of time talking to customers about the whole aspect of digital governance. Can you shed a little bit more light on that?
So the notion of digital governance is about how does a corporation manage everything that it's taking out to the marketplace in its digital footprint. And if you look at where most CDOs originally came from, they were born out of the CIO role. But increasingly what we're seeing is the CDO role is becoming significantly more complex and arguably much more complex than a traditional CIO role. And why is that happening? It's happening because the number of issues, imperatives, business elements that need to be taken into account by a CDO are enormous. And in fact, it's interesting, we're now seeing many CDOs rise to the CEO level. And why is that? It's because they need to bring together the integration of digital media, social media, mobile, the business intelligence to identify, track customers, everything that goes along with revenue generation, new product launch, And yet at the same time, they need to be cognizant of what are the technology imperatives around all of this. Security, e-commerce, the architectures that are flexible enough to support this, and obviously do it all in a manner that that's cost contained and well managed. So it's become a very, very complex position.
Yeah, Yariv, when you and I were talking yesterday, and we were talking particularly about how the CDO role merges technology and business imperatives, you jumped in and said, well, I think it's a lot broader. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so from where I come from in marketing, for example, there's definitely a need. This industry was disrupted so much because of digital that companies have to bring those people with expertise, with specialities on board. My perspective on this is, look, companies always released products. They always advertised, they always did marketing, and they always did everything that they do today. Digital is adding additional marketing channels. It's adding additional channels for product development and engagement with consumers. It's essentially, it's not inventing the business. It's just adding, it's broadening the spectrum in which you need to operate. The challenge is that digital is complicated, and there's not a lot of skill out there. And the companies, the staff that exists traditionally, even amongst the executive team, just don't know how to eat that on their own. And they need to bring someone in who specializes in that particular channel, because it became so profound and so fast that they need somebody in to run this operation for them. And I agree with Kevin. It's slowly becoming the channel to operate on, and it's beginning to shadow significantly other channels. And you can see this in e-commerce over the last 20 years, how websites began to, from being the two people that just repurposed the brick and mortar store content or the catalog content, that just became something that is the leading channel for sales.
Yariv, when you look at the chief digital officers, the ones you deal with, in fact, you very much resemble that role. Where are they coming from? Are these people that are coming from the technology side of the business, or more often you see them from the marketing or sales side of the business?
Well, I'll tell you what, they're not coming with it from school, because schools don't teach that stuff yet. So this is something that comes with experience, and it has to be someone who, I would say that you see coming from both sides. It's either a marketer who decided to take on himself to learn and stay on top of the digital changes, or it's a technology person who came from a technology innovation company who who learned marketing on the job as he was trying to. This is pretty much what happened to me. I came from a technology side and a creative side, and I learned marketing because there was a necessity to combine the two in the marketplace.
Yeah, Yariv, that's interesting. I think my personal experience as I talk to CDOs, I'm seeing that a number of them, technology leaders who got experience in the early e-commerce companies, have a very good handle on digital.
Yes, they actually had to build things from the ground up.
Right.
And they had to, essentially rub their elbows really hard and scuff themselves really hard to learn this thing. But you know what? The challenge is that the technologies and new technologies are coming up so rapidly that even someone who was a veteran in e-commerce since the revolution back in 2000 is now becoming, if they're not staying on top or the cutting edge, it's very easy to just fall behind.
Right.
It's a challenging position for sure.
No, definitely, and I think even more challenging that we just talked about significant growth, right? We talked about how the investments are growing, and you're seeing the results of those investments in advertising on the mobile platform, on the web platform, apps download, but then you're also seeing that in the introduction of digital initiatives leading to introduction of products. So let's talk about some of the challenges that these CDOs, CTOs, CIOs, whoever's running or has a responsibility for these initiatives. And one of the ones, Yariv, that you just touched on was talent shortage. I was looking at some of the statistics. Code.org did a survey, and they estimated that by 2020, there'll be 1,000 more jobs than computer science students. And then when CSC and TCS asked companies, if you're anticipating a shortage of talent, which is what they were hearing, name the top 3 disciplines where you think you'll experience the greatest shortfall of qualified in the next 5 years. This was done in the summer of 2014. And program managers, embedded software engineers, business IT engineers, which to me, I think of them as business analysts. Those are some of the ones that are coming up as the highest in terms of shortage. So we know that. In fact, in the UK, when this organization called GfK did a survey, and they said, what are the most in-demand skills? You saw coders and developers, web design, user experience as one of the highest in-demand skills. And then when you looked at, okay, what is the most difficult to recruit, you saw that coders and developers and user experience, those were some of the most difficult skill sets to recruit. So it's very clear that we're seeing that many of these are challenging skills, and also as you look at the future, it's clear that there is a belief that this will be challenging. So Kevin, you work with a number of CTOs and CDOs across the country and even in Europe. How are they handling this lack of talent today, and how are they thinking about handling it as you look into the future?
It's actually one of the biggest challenges that they're facing, and I'm sure those of you on this webinar are probably facing similar challenges. If you look at the digital product and service cycle, it gets shorter every quarter. So the requirement to get products out, to get services out to market is unrelenting. And so time to market now equals time to revenue. So if you're not able to launch, if you're not able to test, if you're not able to put your products or services out, you've got not only a revenue impact, but you've got a competitive impact as well. And when you look at the intersection of skills and technologies that need to come together in the digital space, you're talking about a very, very broad spectrum of skills and required resources, whether it's big data and analytics, whether it's network balancing, whether it's user experience, whether it's marketing. It all needs to come together and come together very quickly. And what our clients are finding, and the people that we interact with every day, is that they generally don't have the right number of skills in their organization. They need to go out and find them. And how they find them and do that in a manner that's flexible, that's fast, that's cost effective, is critical to the success of their digital business.
So, Yariv, I'm going to ask you a question, but before I do that, let me just do a quick poll to see what the audience thinks. So the poll that I'm asking you is, are you using global resources for your digital initiatives? So what I would really like the audience to answer is, are you using global resources? When I say global, I'm talking about beyond the boundaries of the US, the UK. Are you using global resources for digital initiatives? I'm going to just wait for another 5 seconds while people are voting. What's interesting is when we look at technical resources around the world, what we are seeing is that there is significant growth that's happening. And I just put up a slide just to kind of highlight one of them, and that was how the workforce of some of the key technology leaders. Now, again, this is not specific to digital initiatives, but I just wanted to share how the workforce of the key technology leaders. So when you see, for example, IBM, TCS, Accenture, Cognizant, Infosys, Wipro, what you notice is, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, IBM and Accenture did not have a single person in India. And look at where they are today, over 100,000 each. In fact, Accenture is over 100,000. This was an estimate for 2013. So what you're noticing is that there is a significant uptick in leveraging of talent globally. And by the way, when you look at the results from our audience today, over 80% of you said that you are using global resources today. Only 20% of you are not doing that. So I think we're already starting to see that companies are leveraging global talent. So let's talk about how to best leverage global talent. But before I get into much detail, Yariv, I know you've had a lot of experience in this area. Would you care to comment?
Yeah, in terms of my experience, there are some ground rules that I think are very important. First of all, it's difficult. There's no doubt that it's challenging to find resources, and I see that I see this as a kind of a loop, right? It's the platforms are changing, they're rapidly changing, and you need to stay on top. But there's not enough resources to build and to keep you up there. The cost of skills is therefore increasing. The high attrition rate. It's very difficult to keep employees, who are so in demand, and it's very difficult to scale. So you start looking around of where can I find resources for to get the work done. And then what we found is that there are pockets of areas, and I think that you need to, when you look out, when we are looking at digital sourcing, the work can be done from almost anywhere in the world. If there is infrastructure that can provide, solid internet connection and power, then you can find resources almost everywhere. The things that become more important have to do with the specific tasks that need to be executed. How good does the English need to be? How good does the proximity to the markets or to the culture that in marketing that's important? And we're looking around and we're seeing that we can find, really great people to manage social channels in Romania, and we're finding that we can find resources that can do creative for marketing in Argentina. We find good developers and project management skill set in India for trafficking. And for data entry, we had fantastic experience with a group called Service Engine that has a team in Bangladesh. And really, you can find resources in different pockets that are very good in various tasks. And there's really no reason to eliminate, or focus on just India or just China or just South America. I have experience working with teams from all over the world just because they were good at what I needed them to do, and you can look anywhere and you will find those opportunities.
Thanks, Yariv. So just to add to what Yariv, let's dig a little bit deeper into this. So our experience says that sourcing knowledge is key, right? And what that means is having a clear sourcing strategy, and I think we'll walk through some of that in more detail. What does that mean? Knowledge of the location, knowledge of the talent, as Yariv was talking about, finding. So know your locations, right? Know what you can find, and more importantly, what does it take to develop them. And so some of this is about talent, but there's also a lot about the markets themselves. In terms of, for example, we know that in Brazil, you might pay anywhere from 50 to 80% of payroll in taxes and benefits. We know, for example, that you can run any kind of shift in Costa Rica, but if you're doing that in Guatemala, you're not going to be able to run any short shifts. You'll have to have only full-time workers in many of these centers. We know, for example, as Yariv was talking about, that when it comes to media specific, when it comes to social media skills, that you can find a strong group of talent in locations like Argentina that also then have context when it comes to the American culture. Knowing the size of the graduate pool every year helps, because you're not the only company that will be there. There's many others that will be competing for it. And many companies found, for example, when they first moved to Dublin, Ireland, that very quickly it was really hard to recruit, because when you only have about 5,000 graduates a year, the big established pharma technical companies were getting access to all that talent, and so smaller mid-sized companies or the next big entrant was not able to find that talent. So knowing that, And knowing that not just for technology, but also non-technology grads. One of the things we're finding, as Yariv was talking about, in digital initiatives, it's not just about technical skills. Often, the other skills that are needed might be advertising traffic management. Other skills that might be needed might be analytics, so maybe financial statistical skills. So there is a number of different skill sets that companies are looking for. So it's really important to be able to look at these locations and say, how do I compare these locations and what makes this location right for me, not just today, but also into the future? Kevin, any thoughts, anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I think Yariv had it right. This is not just an India answer anymore. The global sourcing environment has become much more sophisticated, and you're not just looking in many cases for technical talent, but you're also looking for industry affinity. So Atul, you mentioned Brazil. Brazil, for example, has a very, very well-established media and publishing industry. So if you're looking for media, publishing, content type of skills, maybe Brazil is someplace you should be looking at. Similarly, you can find industry affinities for CPG and financial services and other areas as well. So it's actually become more complicated for the CDO to figure out where should they be sourcing their resources based on the combination not just of technical skills but the industry affinities as well.
The good news is they have plenty of options.
Yes, they do.
So, other than the knowledge about locations and the talent, we find that to be successful in sourcing, particularly, whether you're sourcing to a partner or whether you're sourcing to your own center, and what many people today call GIC or a global in-house, it's important to figure out what is it that you should be sourcing. And so one of the things I wanted to introduce on this call is a model around one way to think about what companies are deciding to absolutely keep and what companies are looking to actually source. And it doesn't mean that this is an all or nothing situation. So, when you look at this chart, for example, and let's take a look at, e-commerce, and what we're finding is as people are moving to a Drupal CMS or any system that might be built on other newer technologies, that often those technologies are high in demand in the US, but low in availability. But they're also available in many other locations like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and of course, India and others. But what we find is that there's other factors you have to look at. For example, the technology or the process that's being worked on, how integrated is that with other parts of the business? Is that capability or that business domain will lead to a transformation? So it might be the launch of a whole new digital product, or is this really a mainstream expertise and you're looking for an operations capability, not necessarily the launch of a new product? So what we are finding is that companies are spending a lot more time today thinking about what should I retain and keep so that I build my expertise in that area, and then what is it that I can actually work remotely or source to a different partner. Yariv or Kevin, do you want to add anything to that before we talk about kind of how to drive the right incentives?
I think that's a good observation. If you look, increasingly companies want to keep the most strategic elements inside the company and then free up the brightest people they have to focus on that and new products and launch of new products and services. And so how do you create this dichotomy between what do I need to keep and what do I want to source is ultimately the question. The good news is that when you're looking at CDO type initiatives, the requirements around testing, around user experience, around early launch, all lend themselves very well to a sourcing option, and in turn, allow companies to focus more increasingly internally on what's most important in terms of driving revenue strategy and market differentiation. Yariv, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, and there's actually a point where that I might challenge you on here. I think that in some situations, user experience is something that you would definitely want to keep. My rule of thumb is, and I can't tell you how many times I've said this, but you never outsource your core competency, right? we need to identify what your core competency is. What are you for your customers? What do they see you as? And this is something you should absolutely keep in-house, and you need to fight to not send this out or source it. By the way, when you say sourcing, you mean outsourcing, probably sending work outside of your organization. When I think of global resources, it's not necessarily BPO, meaning I'm sending work outside of the organization. There's the opportunity to have a team in a different location around the world that is still integrated into your company. It's not another company. It's still globalization. So, if your core competency is user experience, if you are an e-commerce company that is a retailer, then how people are interacting with your website, the flow of the pages, and the sentiment, whether your site is performing or not. This is, or the messaging that you have on your website. This piece is critical for your business. This is something you definitely want to keep. However, the execution of the work is definitely something you can send out. So if I go back to my previous point, I never outsource core competency, but by all means, I challenge everything that is not core competency. Should I be doing this or not? So if I think of a media company, whether it's a publisher or an agency or a technology firm like MediaMind, where I used to work, trafficking ads in a system is not a core competency. It's just something we had to do. And therefore, I found a partner, like mentioned before, Service Engine, who could learn it. If it can be taught, and it's repetitive, it was a perfect example for me to take a piece of work, teach someone outside the organization how to do it, and then allow them to manage the resources for me. And I kept a team inside my company that interacted with that outsourcing team, and it was a fantastic experience. It grew 1,000% in a matter of 2-3 years, and it's still running to this day. So I think that identifying those areas where you can and should take out and what you should keep in, the core competency for me is the rule.
Yeah, good observations. I think some of the things you're referring to, Yariv, we still call it sourcing, but we refer to them as GICs, or Global In-House Centers, where these are centers that are owned by the company, but they are in globally distributed locations. Right. So, Yariv, one of the things, I think it would be good for you to share a little bit more about, you talked about, leveraging Service Engine. Can you talk a little bit about, so, as you thought about your digital initiatives, you took traffic management and you sourced it to Service Engine, and in fact, you made the investment, even though that skill set did not exist, you felt that they had the capability where they could learn. Can you talk a little bit more about what you decided to keep, what you gave to them, and then talk a little bit about how did you reach the conclusion that you were willing to take the risk of actually training, even though that skill set did not actually exist initially?
It's a very good point, because there's definitely a ramp-up period, right, where you are not getting results right off the bat. It takes commitment, and really when we were looking, we identified that trafficking, for example, and reporting for campaigns results is not something that we necessarily need to do in the US. It's something that we can teach someone how to do this if they have the necessary skills. If they're diligent, if they know how to use Excel, if they're good communicators, then they can do this. And I don't care what language they speak. If they can read English, I don't care where they're located. They can do this. So what I was looking for is not necessarily, given that this skill set exists, what I was looking for is a partner that could really work the way we work. And I needed somebody to build their operation around how we work, and not just give me rules of, okay, if you want to work with us, this is how you interact. So what Service Engine gave me is really the opportunity to build a team offshore without having to absorb the overhead of hiring, training. I mean, I provided training, of course, but they created the structure inside the organization in Bangladesh where they were training, new recruits all the time, and so there was always a buffer of additional resources that could take on work, and I could easily scale. In addition, one of my rules of thumb in engagement is that you have to treat your vendors like you treat your clients. They are just as important to your operation. And I always treated every vendor I worked with as if they were my client. If I identified individuals inside their organization that are essential to my business, I insisted on let's do a comp structure for them that is different, or let's give them a position inside Service Engine where they can become team leads or they have opportunity for growth, and we paid them more because we wanted to retain them and we wanted to scale this organization. So just because you're sending work out, then the relationship with the partner are essential for the success of the operation. From that point on, the challenge was adoption, and this is something that nobody who is about to source globally should take lightly. Ultimately, if you're sourcing out some capacity of production inside your organization, you're going to need your in-house team to delegate this work out. Don't take this lightly. People don't like doing this. It's an investment that we had to take, and we invested a lot in getting people to leverage that resource. This was actually harder than training Service Engine how to do the work. So don't take that lightly. It's easily forgotten, something that you've got to do, but you have to nurture that adoption until your in-house employees realize that this is adding value to them, and they will begin to delegate work.
So, Yariv, I think those are great points, right? So what you're saying is, hey, the change here is not just focused on your partner learning with you. The change is as much, in many cases, greater on the client side itself in terms of preparing people how to manage in this new environment. And we know, for example, technology sourcing has been in place for a long period of time, but the differences that we are seeing in digital sourcing is there's such a huge premium to the user experience that the client side has to be significantly engaged in this process, right? The client side has to be engaged not just in the requirements stage, but also, has to be a co-creator in the development, in the testing, in the creation stage also. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is to make sure that you're driving the right incentives. And, we see incentives really truly based on a couple of different models. One is really more of a pricing or a service level based model, where the other one is really of a governance or how you kind of manage everything based model. And the reality is we find that most of these models are a hybrid of these two, right? So from a pricing SLA perspective, who controls it? What kind of incentives you drive? Are you sharing any gains? The ability to co-create the work environment. One of the companies we're working with right now is a gaming company, and we find that the teams that are more successful are the teams that are co-creating, right? So it's not just a team where the U.S. side is doing all the fun work, and then the team that's sitting offshore is doing all just the simple, coding or testing. What we're finding is the successful teams actually fully integrate the team, that they serve as a single pod rather than a master-slave relationship.
Very, very important. I agree.
Kevin, any thoughts on that? As you see some of the incentives that some of the forward-thinking CDOs drive?
So increasingly, what we're finding is CDOs want to have partners, vendors, sourcing partners who will put skin in the game, who will step up to outcomes, who not only understand the technology, but understand their business. And so if you look at traditional outsourcers now, what you're seeing is that they're starting to move through what I characterize as another maturity curve. And that maturity curve is moving away from core technology skills to business consulting driven technology skills. And so if you look at the HCLs and the Infosys and the Wipros of the world, you're starting to see another layer of expertise come in. And that layer of expertise, I think, is being driven largely because CDOs and the like are asking these vendors to not just provide a technical capability, but to provide a business capability and do it in such a way that they're engaged in their business outcomes, and those business outcomes drive what the engagement model is going to look like.
So if you look at the big, the IT services market, it's very clearly dominated by a lot of the large players, right? So you see the IBM, Accenture, TCS, Wipro, Infosys, Cognizant, and others. When you look at the digital spend and the digital initiatives, often what you're seeing is it's the realm of the boutiques, right? It's the smaller companies. Starting with you, Yariv, that's one of the questions from the audience too, by the way. What do you think the large players have to do to shape themselves to have a larger market share in the digital space?
I do agree that there is a big growth in boutique companies, and they, usually companies that offer services to only 2 or 3 clients, and that will suffice for them for a decent growth. I think that you're asking what the large companies would need to do?
Yeah.
I think that it's all about being flexible, and that's becoming more and more difficult when you're large, right? But if you can offer that flexibility, or even create teams inside the companies that are dedicated to clients, then this is something that will help you increase the flexibility. I think large organizations in the U.S. that look for sourcing, it's very important that they will create a team in-house. You need vendor management is important for when it comes to outsourcing. Somebody has to manage that relationship. Somebody has to manage the adoption. Somebody has to ensure that the utilization, that the level of quality that's coming back from the vendor is up to par. And I'm not talking about the guys who actually delegate the work. I'm talking about somebody just managing this relationship. It's important. And the larger companies, if they employ a lot of people offshore, they will need to have just a broader band of this aspect, but it's still going to be a lot more manageable, and they're going to get better results than trying to hire all this capacity in the U.S.
So that's a very good point, and I think the good news for CDOs is that service providers are listening. So if you look at digital initiatives, the elements in there around social, big data, mobile, are all the key investment areas from pick a vendor, whether it's IBM, whether it's Accenture, whether it's Capgemini. So it's not just the little guys who are creating this as their sandbox and their playground, but it's now the big guys who are putting significant money around not just their go-to-market strategies, but their R&D and product execution capabilities as well, so that they can help you in these initiatives. And that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because you now have more choices. It makes the sourcing process a little more complex. But the good news is you do have more choices, and you do have more qualified vendors from whom to choose.
I think the one other thing that I see is, it's a very different team member mindset. So, I think about one of the companies that we worked with, a company called Zemoga that leverages resources in Colombia. I mean, they were the social media partner for Anchorman. They designed the user experience when you buy a Gulfstream jet, for example. That person that's working on those projects is a very different mindset than the person that's sitting, let's pick a city, sitting in Guadalajara working on an SAP, maintenance, right, testing. It's very different. So it's almost like you cannot take a tester and think they're going to be a digital native. And so you're really hiring people for a skill set, but really also for a mindset, right? I mean, just like the difference between when you hire somebody to do administrative piece of work compared to somebody who's going to do marketing for you. That's a different mindset.
Yeah. I agree, and I think that, when people, that outsourcing has the connotation of efficiency and not necessarily talent sourcing. Right? And I think that this connotation is, in a way, hurting both sides of the equation. In my experience, people are just avoiding looking for talented people for non-mundane work outside of the U.S. But that could be a mistake, because I found extremely talented people in many other corners of the world that performed or had the aptitude that is much better than what I could find in the U.S. Definitely for the price that we ended up paying. But and what I meant by the two sides of the coin, I think that the companies that provide the services, right, the vendors, wherever they are, they're also not enough banging that drum of we have talent that is very likely better than what you have in the U.S. We had people in service engine trafficking or team leads with PhDs. I could never hire a person with a PhD in the U.S. At that level, right, to do this kind of work. And it's the same for many other things. In India, I found people with incredible knowledge in marketing and understanding consumer behavior, analytics, and big data analysis. These are very, very important jobs today, right? Data analysis, insights from big data. That's the biggest in-demand positions right now. And I found very talented people in India that can do this, but they themselves don't know how good they are in comparison to the U.S. So I would encourage both sides of the fence, both companies in the U.S. to give more credit to people offshore, and people offshore, you need to realize that your position is actually stronger than what you think it is, and you need to go out and bang this drum. Don't be afraid to compete for positions that are, more coveted.
Right. So one of the things that I wanted to do as we are nearing the end of this webinar is talk about what we see as good practices to ensure success in digital initiatives. And I think, we looked at some of the research we had done across outsourcing globally, and we find that many of those, actually all those, are still very relevant today. We find that this whole aspect of embrace globalization, right, that there is talent available globally. We know there's shortage of talent. There'll continue to be shortage of talent. So one ought to embrace it, right? Embrace the fact that there is talent available. Make sure you look to partners or locations worldwide. The second part is to leverage this talent to transform. What we are finding is that this talent is not just talent doing rote work, but this talent is launching incredible companies. The market leader, for example, in India, in e-commerce, is not Amazon. It's a company called Flipkart, right? Mm-hmm. So it's and then when you start looking at the market leader in Argentina for digital development is not Accenture. It's a company called Globant, right? So what you're seeing is that there is talent that exists. The other thing we find is that you have to take a life cycle approach. And what we mean by life cycle is be very thoughtful about what you keep, what you source, how you select somebody, how do you manage it. And then make sure that you're aligning your business and sourcing objectives. What is it that you're trying to do with sourcing? Is it a cost-driven initiative, or are you actually trying to accelerate your product development, or you're trying to introduce digital products? Because the kind of talent you look for is going to be very different. And as Yariv was talking about, that these are challenging initiatives, challenging projects, challenging programs. Make sure you assign the best people. And what does that mean? That means people that learn, that are willing to listen, they're willing to change, they have a growth mindset. Having a strong governance model, is, as Kevin talked about, is really important, right? Which is making sure your objectives, your execution is very clearly aligned, and you have a good monitoring mechanism. And then finally, embracing this whole iterative approach, a continuous mindset, is extremely important. So I think those 7 secrets that we had written in this book called Globalization Wisdom still stand. On that point, let me turn into each of you to see if you have any final comments, and then any questions that are left over. Kevin, I think what we're going to try and do is answer them hopefully through an email, and also we'll post this in our knowledge center. So let me turn over to you, Kevin, for any final closing comments first.
Thanks, Atul. So I think everyone will acknowledge that if you look at digital initiatives, the cycle time continues to accelerate. And so the imperative of getting to market as quickly as possible, whether from a revenue maximization perspective or a competitive differentiation perspective, is not changing. And in fact, we're going to see it continue to accelerate. And in order to accommodate that acceleration, CDOs and others are going to have to figure out how do you maximize scarce resources. And so the entire notion around the sourcing strategy really becomes, how do I make those resources, make them more available? How do I make them more cost effective? And how do I integrate them better into my overall digital planning initiatives? And so I think if you look at, from a holistic perspective, back to the digital governance notion, that digital governance is not just how do I launch a new product, how do I launch a new service. It's really the entire life cycle around how do I envision it, how do I prototype it, how do I test it, how do I launch it, how do I support it, and how do I integrate my customers in the process. And along with that, threaded through all of those elements is a sourcing requirement. And I think Atul did a very good job of mapping out how that sourcing environment has changed positively for these kind of initiatives.
Yariv, on to you for final comments.
Yeah, in summary, first of all, consider leveraging resources offshore. If you're not, you're missing out. You're missing out on efficiency, but you're also missing out on talent. Besides that, you got to look inside and identify what is your core competency, what are the things you have to keep, and what things as Atul mentioned, that you are and you should be looking to outsource. And then, just to reiterate some of the things I said before, treat your vendors, once you identified one who can really work with you and help you scale and be a real good partner, you got to treat them as clients, and you have to invest in the interface between the two companies, or it's not going to work. And then don't neglect adoption. You have to, once you created that interface, once you created that additional capacity, you have to create inside the organization, invest in the effort to get people to adopt that new process, to send work out, to collaborate with people offshore, and not just look at the people who sit around them, for collaboration. So leveraging it really, in many aspects of the organization, the more engagement you're going to have with the vendor, the more successful you're going to get from it. So, and when it comes to either BPO or in-house sourcing, I would suggest to, for companies who are just making that foray into leveraging global talent, is to start with BPO, get the process in place, and then just make the in-house or not in-house a decision that, once the economics makes place, once you manage to leverage global resourcing, my advice would be to start with a managed, a partner who provides you managed service, and then if the economics justify it, you might want to take it in-house or not.
Kevin and Yariv, thank you so much for those comments. And just, some final comments from me. I think on top of the 7 secrets that we were talking about, I think Kevin and Yariv shared a number of practical thinking, practical experience that they have had. And I encourage you that as you think about your global digital initiatives or your digital initiatives as such, take a look at the talent and the suppliers that exist in the marketplace. They're as varied as Service Engine and Operative and Theorem in the ad op space to Capgemini, Accenture, Infosys, Zemoga, CINT, Globant, and many others in the services supplier space. And of course, there's players like Nino that help you manage the whole life cycle. I also encourage you to go to neogroup.com, and if you look in the knowledge section, you should see a recent infographic that was published on the whole Chief Digital Officer role and the rise of that role. And more importantly, let me end this webinar by Yariv thanking you. Yariv, thank you for sharing your experience both on the buy side and, of course, as an industry expert. And then Kevin, again, thank you so much for sharing your experience both on the consulting side and your vast experience working with CDOs. Thank you again, and I appreciate the attendees. Yariv?
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you, Yariv.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free to send us an email with any comments you have or any suggestions that you have. And thank you so much for making time to be on today's webinar. Thanks, everybody.